a Florida Writer podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be visited by Andy N. Andy, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Oh, blimey, now 60 seconds. Okay, right, I'm counting. Right. Andy N, I have wrote 10 full-length poetry books. My last two were Changing Carriages at Birmingham New Street, which is a love story that goes tragically wrong, and a memoir poetry book called From the Diabetic Ward, covering my struggle with diabetes. I've also, since the last time I spoke to you, Alison, also bought my debut novel, which is called Birth, which is about the birth of an artist.
Ooh, the birth of an artist. Is that inspired by real life?
It's a funny one because it's complete fiction, but the area it's set in and the time it's set on, I know really well. So I basically put fictional characters in a true life town at true life space and time.
And tell me about the artist.
The artist is the in question on the novel is a 16-year-old lad who gets a poet dragged out of him. And then as the book goes along, it becomes apparent he ends up forming a band, gets his heart broken, and then at the end of the book is writing his first novel.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. So do you write music? Do you have any musical background?
Badly. Badly. I've fronted a few bands and I can play guitar badly and I can sing badly. But I can play keyboards really well, so that's my background really. And I can compose music off that. That's what I do with composing on normally with keyboard.
Do you find that music and poetry work hand in hand?
Yeah, they do. Certainly when it's both got going on at the same time. Maybe they did a long time ago, music afterwards, but they were always separate things. And it's only been the past few years they've kind of crossed over. If that makes sense.
Right.
They've amalgamated last couple of years.
Ah, yeah. Well, I know that poetry is often very rhythmic, and it's something that is, I don't want to say necessarily pleasing to the ear, because I think of Sylvia Plath and her poetry wasn't necessarily pleasing or pleasant to listen to, but it was very felt, much the way music can be felt. It was moody. It has all that background of the intensity that can be there. And so that too reminds me of music, because there's certainly songs out there that are loud and angry, and yet they stick in your head like an earworm.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's straight away. Yeah. Some of my favorite songs are the more louder you can get them, which isn't always ominous for my neighbours or my wife. But yeah, I know what you mean with that. I think music themselves is, like, interesting. It's Sylvia Plath, like I said, her poetry is such taunt and rage in it. I think that's what stood the test of time of her 60 years later, really. Yeah, no, it's music can be like that as well sometimes. More raging, powerful stuff. It's people like when they're almost like they're losing control. I think that's what sticks to people's heads. I think with poetry as well.
So you've written some poetry books and they sound thematic. Are they an actual story from beginning to end, like an epic poem, or are they more like episodic poems that put together a story?
Second one, definitely, because the last poetry book I've done, Changing Carriages, that's an episodic story told over about 15 years really, but probably about 20 actually, where two children meet up through the parents. One of them moves away, then 20 years later, this one moves away, comes back into the life of the other one, and chaos happens, where they end up having an affair. They're both in unhappy marriages, end up leaving the partners, getting married, and it doesn't finish well.
It doesn't finish well. Poetry is often heartbreaking, right?
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It isn't a happy end in this book. I've tried to be powerful with it, and it's worked really well, actually. Book before, from Diabetic Ward, is a true story, because I have registered with diabetes in 2011, and the 5 years that book covers, which I stopped it just before I met my wife, basically. because that's a different ball game altogether. But that was the most difficult 5 years of my life, and it was a pretty traumatic time when you think really like you've had a major change to your health. It causes all kinds of complications. And it caused me a lot to reevaluate my life, myself as a person, everything really. And I wanted to do this from a diabetic world, looking at it from my life, but also there's lots of little poems in it. For example, when I got diabetes, I was known for going in the chip shop for chip shop in my mum and dad's every Friday night, and after have been out all night. And I heard for a fact when they found out I got diabetes, they closed for a week in shock.
Why did they close
So
the shop?
and then like they closed. I closed a shop because I'm not exactly the most quiet customer you can ever have. That's the best way of putting it. It's where I lived at that time. I'm heading the direction where I am now, but I was a known character, shall we say, right?
A known character. That's awesome. That's many. That's often the reason we want to write is to create known characters.
Yeah, I am a known character. That's why. So that's why. But it's just because I'm not exactly a very quiet, shy person. That's why I talk to anybody.
So you've had a podcast yourself for quite some time. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, you were on it about 3 years ago, actually, as well. So we're still going to rebook you in for later on. Yeah, Spoken Label is very similar to this, basically, where it's an author-artist chat podcast. Started off in 2016. They've managed to maintain a close to at least a weekly schedule ever since. And it's had, would you believe, now just hit over 400 episodes.
Wow, fantastic.
Well, comes to this where I chat to people, encourage them to tell the stories, where all the creativity came from. I tell you 3 points really, where they came from, where they are now, and what's happening next. Then the second half, if they wish, I encourage them to read out a bit of their work.
Ah, yes, it's fun to read your work, isn't it?
Yeah, love it. Always love it. It's doing this sort of podcast. You know with yourself, Alison. It's like you love hearing people and tell the stories of where the writing came from and hearing bits of the work sometimes as well.
That is really fun. And I can attest to the fact that when people can share their stories and how the stories evolved, that behind the scenes, pulling that curtain back, it is an extraordinary peek into someone's mind.
Oh yeah, completely. You do. It's like they always tend to say writing, it's such a personal business. What I may write in a book, you may do it in a completely different way. There's no no right way, no wrong way with it. And like the Changing Carriages book for me, it was a complete accident. The diabetic book was planned all along, but the Changing Carriages one wasn't. It just kind of sneaked out a couple of poems, like, and I thought, oh, I like the voice in this. They wanted their own storytelling, so that's what happened.
And you kept the same that's an interesting point because I've not written a full book. When I write poetry, they're typically personal and it's my voice. I'm not writing it as somebody else. So you're taking a character and you are creating the backstory, you're creating the story that they're living and maintaining that voice the whole time, but through poetry. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what happened that last book, and it was the most difficult book I've done. Actually, that was because a lot of the other books I've done before that, I've got 3 books knocking around there about the seasons, the summer, autumn, and winter, which is quite easy to do. You can tell lots of stories set in those themes. I've done another one set in when I was working back office of a court, telling lots of little legends and stories, And then like with Diabetic One, this one now I'm talking about, that was the most difficult book. But when I'd done a couple in that voice, it became quite apparent that I could maintain the voice. And that was quite a tricky thing to do because you're trying to tell little snapshots and not tell the full story. Because I think I wrote about 150 poems this book I did. And only about 50 ended up in the book. Because some of them were, you know what I mean, were saying too much and telling all the story. And I wanted the audience to have to work the story out themselves to a degree.
I think that's a really interesting exercise for people to try. I know poetry itself can be very personal when you are reading it, and it can be personal to write it. So let's talk about the writing of poetry. When you write, you leave yourself on the page, but when the audience picks it up, they're not really picking up who you are. They're picking up what's on the page. So how do
Yeah,
you separate that, particularly with poetry?
I'm a good liar. That's the best way of putting it. No, but seriously, it's certainly when I was younger, it was warts and all on the page. I think the more experience you get with your poetry, I mean, you must be the same, Alison, as Chivi. You get very good at hiding things. This book, for example, here, there is elements of me in the main narrator. There's no two ways about it, but there's a lot in it that's not me, and that's why I managed to give myself that emotional distance by creating a character. And when I first started the book, I'd only wrote a couple of poems, and I didn't know either of the two characters. And I didn't actually sit down formally and make notes on it. So about 15 poems in, that's how it just burst out of me. Then I sat down and printed them all off, and I had them all lined up on the floor in our kitchen, saying, "Oh, that goes there, that goes there, go there. Who is this character? Who is the female he's fell in love with? Who were the rest of the backing characters that come in and out of it?" So it was like it was a tapestry, and the tapestry then basically you're trying to put yourself into the character, but not make it not you at the same time, and it was a tricky process.
And what do you do when people read the book and think, oh, this is all about you?
I've had that said to me already. I turned around and say to them, "I've never been Paris. I've only been Birmingham once." And they said, but then I said, "Well," then they said, "How do you know all this stuff?" I said, "Well, Google's very good." That's why.
Right.
But also been very good. I'm very good at this book a sense of place. That's how I got away with it. By even in places I didn't know or barely knew, I managed to superimpose the characters into that, and just been a good writer and made it sound real. That's how I got away with it.
And Andy, what's on the horizon for you? Are you working on another poetry book?
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah, it wasn't planned because after Changing Carriages, which took about 9 years to write, and From the Diabetic World took 8, they were both done about 2.5 years ago. And I actually thought that was it, I'll be honest with you, because Birth came along after that, my novel. And I'm currently working on the second novel, which is called Death. So that gives you a clue, right? So it follows on from Birth, and that's all I'm going to say. I'm 75 pages into that. It's looking pretty good. But then I've got another poetry book anyway. Yeah, I've only just started it past couple of months, and it flew out pretty quickly, called Ghosts, and that's about basically like ghost stories. You also like ghosts that haunt people I know myself, but then I'm looking at a lot of the books about ghosts on the landscape and our relationship with the places we grew up in and the land around us. I'm looking at like there's a big park near us, and I know there's ghost stories around that, and I'm wondering to myself like, is that land haunted, or is it haunting us?
Ooh, very philosophical.
Yeah, I'm in a deep mood there. So that in a minute, I said I'm going to try and do about 100 poems for it and pick out the best 50, and I've done 19, so it might be a bit that book yet.
Oh my goodness. Well, Andy, how can people find out more about you and what you've been up to and what's happening with your podcast?
Sure. The best way to get hold of me actually is I've got a Linktree page set up nowadays, actually. And that gives everything on it. It's great. It's link LINKTR full stop double E backslash Andy N artist. And that's got everything on there.
Well, fantastic. Andy, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Go for it. I enjoyed this last time, Alison. So let's do it again.
All right. Tell me something exciting that's happening to you right now.
Well, tomorrow, and I've hinted this before off camera to you, I'm actually going to be shooting an extras advert. Never done this before, so I'm for Walker's Crisps, which are a very famous crisp brand in the UK. I don't know if they are around your way, actually, Alison. Do you get Walker's Crisps near you?
Nope.
Anyway.
Not at least not at my grocery store.
Well, anyway, well, at the moment, we're in the big Euro finals of football at the moment in England. So I've been asked to go and shoot an advert tomorrow afternoon with probably about 100 other people watching England football team play. So that's my exciting and unusual fact that's happening tomorrow. I've got that all afternoon.
Oh, that does sound like a good time. Do you have any volunteer work that you do?
Yes, I'm mentoring actually at the moment. Actually, I've started mentoring 2 young poets, actually. About 3, actually. I'm lying to you. So I could name them, but I will because they love it. Got a young lady called Emily who's I'm mentoring her with a debut podcast, and she's a great little storyteller. Charlotte, who works in the music studio and has got a second book out later in the year, and a young Irish writer called Offering, who's got the best hearts of a poet I've ever come across. So I'm mentoring the 3 of them all the time.
All right. Final question. What is your favorite beverage?
Whiskey.
Straight up.
I'm Scottish. My dad is half Scottish. His dad was born in Edinburgh. So it's odds on I was going to like whiskey. So, whiskey.
Andy, and thank you so much for stopping by.
Pleasure, Alison. Loved it today as always.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo! We're all done.
Andy N. is the author of 10 full-length poetry collections, the last 2 being From the Diabetic Ward Volume 1 and Changing Carriages at Birmingham New Street, and numerous split poetry books, including Runaway with Me in 7 Words, with his wife, Amanda Steele, also known as Amanda Nicholson. Andy is the host and creator of Spoken Label, a poet, writer, and artist podcast series. Also, the Paranormal, Supernatural, and Plain Spooky podcast series with his wife, Amanda Nicholson, called Cloaked in the Shadows. His official website is oneWriter.blogspot.co.uk, and he is always interested in undertaking, performing new projects. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org. Until next time.